All right, we're going to go ahead and start part 3. So we're going to cover the fire ground factors real quick. As you guys know, this is in SOPs. I know you're already studying it.
Oh, yeah.
So we're not going to go as in-depth on this as we could. So in the Recruit Academy, we cover the fire ground factors PowerPoint. It takes about 4 hours. We go through every little bullet point. We have all these different scenarios. Clearly, you guys are on a different level. We don't have time for that today. So we're going to breeze over it and just food for thought stuff to get it back in your head, some stuff to start thinking about. So should you get answered a question at the end of the test or some point in the testing process, what are the most critical fire ground factors on this incident, in your opinion? Or what are your 2 most critical fire ground factors? You know at least what they are, and then the ones you choose, you can elaborate on why and how they play into the incident. So just quick review of this stuff for you guys. So when we talk about how we make rapid and accurate critical decisions, we should have some sort of process, right? So if somebody asks you, how do you make your decisions on the fire ground? We kind of already asked that. You said, well, I look at the building, I may look at the fire and stuff like that. There's some other ways we kind of do that as well. Previous experience. So some people have more experience than others. We know that not everybody on the department has a ton of experience being first in on the same working fire every time to even evaluate how they could have done differently and how those different effects would have played out. And we just know we don't get a lot of fires. So previous experience is something you can use a little bit, but you need to have more than that to make your decisions, especially during testing processes and when you're trying to develop your other members. You got to have something with some grounds to teach them on. So we use visual observations, our reconnaissance stuff, fire ground factors. We use reports that we get, and then of course our recon that we do. And then pre-incident planning, which we talked about already. So why are these factors critical? They help you do an accurate scene size up. They help you select the proper strategy. They assist in the selection of the appropriate tactics, how you're going to approach the event, how you're going to mitigate that hazard basically. They assist in determining your water application, location, and size. So if you're looking at the arrangement of a building or the amount, the extent, and the location of the fire, that can help you decide what the best line is to take, or how large of a line, how many GPMs you need. Do I need a master stream? So it assists you with that. It helps you identify the risks that are involved with the incident. Clearly, if you're looking at a building that has older in age or has some high-risk construction features, that obviously would relate to the risk of the incident. And then it makes your outcome more predictable. So we're going to review an incident at the end that happened at a nightclub. And as you see, if you were to go to this scene before it happened, and you were thinking on a fire ground factor level and went through each one, you would know that this would be a really big deal if there was a fire at this place, and it turns out to be a really big deal. So our fire ground factors, as we go through them, we want to remember them somehow, so we know they're the building, fire, occupancy, life hazard, arrangement, our resources, action effect, and then special. So we've heard beefalaris, if that's how you want to remember them. However else you want to remember them is cool with me. You'll just want to make sure you understand what each one of them actually are referring to. So the building. Size is obviously a factor in the building. Interior arrangement. So we're looking at stairs. We're looking at hallways. We're looking at, vertical elevator chutes, trash chutes, clothing chutes, stuff like that. The type of construction. We know that in our valley here, we got a lot of lightweight construction. What we learned from the Fire Ground Survival Program is, in their opinion, as they traveled around the United States and taught their program, that lightweight construction was the most dangerous type of construction around. And I found that kind of interesting, because as they came into us, I thought for sure they were going to say, well, our high-rises in New York are these very large old buildings that are, have termites and are dilapidated and old, or they're high risk. They were like, no, your lightweight construction is the highest risk stuff around. That's the stuff that's collapsing on people and trapping them in small amounts of time. So construction, clearly a big factor. The age of the building, the condition. We always talk about compartments and how compartments can assist in containing a fire and possibly even doing some steam conversion on them. Or they can also challenge us in trying to locate how to make access to that compartment and put a fire out. So we've seen that multiple times in large homes with compartmentalized attics or other things that have compartments. Sometimes we consider using piercing nozzles to get into a compartment to fight a fire. So we talked about all these different openings, concealed spaces, stuff like that. So all things you can kind of think of on the top of your head. So when we talk about interior arrangement, we talk about something that's really common in Mesa that you guys all go on all the time, and almost no matter what area you go to, are your apartments, right? Your garden style apartments, typically maybe not more than 3 stories high. They typically have a quick access out to a grass area. They may have a view out to the grass. They don't necessarily have the interior hallways. But then we have our, center hallway apartments that are a whole different animal as far as line deployment, tactics, and stuff like that. So if you think about Station 20, for instance, has a whole bunch of center hallway assisted living type facilities or care homes. Or a lot of times higher end apartments, stuff like that will have a center hallway because the center hallway is air conditioning and it just makes the overall feel of the building nicer. But then when we get down to Fours area, maybe they have a ton of the garden style apartments. So when we think about these garden style apartments, we know that typically there's a stairwell that goes up to that second floor. There may be a stairwell on the back side. And when we have a fire, we start thinking about access to that fire or egress for the occupants and their savability profile. So if you have a fire in that front little living room, dining room, in the kitchen area, and somebody comes out there and opens that door and leaves that door open, that's going to affect the evacuation of all these other apartments as that fire laps up onto that stairwell. This person can't come out their door. This person can't get down the stairs. So now you may have a rescue problem where you got to get these people out of windows because they don't have any other way to get out of their apartment. In the interior hallways, we know that smoke becomes a problem. We don't even have a safe haven in the stairwell or somewhere. Now we're in a hallway, and now we got to be masked up in there. Not to mention, we walk down these interior hallways, and who's walked down a hallway carrying the boxes and said, dang, these boxes are getting heavy. This is a long hallway. I hate when we go back to this apartment back here because it's burning my arms every time. Well, that should tell you, how am I going to get a hose line all the way back here? How far are we from the truck? So start thinking about when you go into those center hallway places. I mean, clearly these ones, we know with the garden style ones, or with a balcony, we can typically go up, go to a safe area. So if you have a long balcony here that goes all the way across the building on the exterior, sometimes there'll be stairs. You can go up there, you drop your high-rise pack down, raise the Y up, stretch your line down there. But it's a little different on an interior hallway. There's not really an area from the outside, so we have to start looking at where do we connect our water supply? Do we even know where that's at? So typically, where are those water connections located? Huh?
A lot of it, that's a truck. There is no.
Yeah, so sometimes, yeah, so stairwells, or maybe at the truck, but oftentimes, thanks, Mark. Oftentimes, there's a stairwell with a standpipe in them too. So we got to know where are those standpipes located. And then, excuse me, when's the last time I've actually deployed a line in a stairway? You know what I mean? We did it in the academy, but have I been on a fire since then? Do I flake it off my shoulder as I go up the stairs? Do I go to floor above before below? Do I try the coil method on this little landing in this little stairwell? So these are all big things. So we got plenty of these buildings in Mesa. And there was a fire in 20s area on the 3rd floor, interior hallway, where there was a gentleman, double amputee, laying in bed. He had a scooter charging next to him. Scooter battery caught on fire, burned him in his bed, and then luckily the sprinklers controlled the fire. 20 gets dispatched on a fire alarm, and of course they go up there, it's a fire alarm, and then, oh no, we smell smoke and there's water coming out from under the door, changes the game. So if that place didn't have sprinklers, or for whatever reason it got into the attic and the sprinkler passed the sprinklers, we would have been in a pinch. So think about really how competent you are or your crew is on getting to a fire in one of these. If we ever really have a fire in one of these, and it could happen in Mesa, there's no doubt, there's a lot of them. There's a couple of them in Threes area as well. And in Threes area, it's one of the ones that the fire alarm goes off all the time. And there's a trash chute in it, and there's been fires in the trash chute, and then we get complacent because we're like, dude, the fire alarm goes off there all the time, man. But it's one with interior hallways that'll catch us. So start thinking about that, because now as the captain, you're the one that's responsible to make sure your guys have practiced or know what to do. And then you'll want to know, hey, this is what we're going to do. We've talked about this. So when you're trying to be mobile command or try to make decisions, your guys aren't like, whoa, where am I going with the hose? So it sounds crazy, but you got to figure that stuff out. So remember, that building and its arrangement plays into it. It's a big deal. So we know age, all that stuff plays into it as well. So typically skip sheeting on those older homes. They may not have had air conditioning when they were built, so they have some sort of subfloor. They were designed to have some airflow through them to keep them cooler. So if that skip sheeting hasn't been resheeted with plywood and new shake shingle or new, asphalt shingles or something, you may still have a building that's conducive to fire spread, may have a little heavier timber, but it also may have better airflow to spread the fire quicker. But you rove into a ladder and you don't know your building construction. You're like, I haven't really been on a ladder. Oh, I'm a captain. Well, I'm not going to bid a ladder. Oh, I'm a rover. Oh, wait, they just put me on ladder 1 for a while. Uh-oh, I better figure this out. Hey, let's drive around and start looking where those skip sheeted houses, because I'm going to feel like a clown in the middle of the night if they tell me to get up on that skip sheeted roof and vent it, and I don't come back and say, hey, I just wanted to let you know this skip sheeted roof. And the BC may or may not pull you off. But as you look at those pictures, you think it's different getting on that, an old rotted out, pieced out skip sheeted roof with some old wood shingles? Is that more hazardous than getting on a conventionally framed plywood decked one or even an OSB lightweight one? Especially if whoever's cutting hasn't cut one of those or hasn't cut ever. Well, you're like, well, I went to training. We cut this 4x4 OSB thing. It was kind of real. So you got to know those risks out there. You're going to end up a rover. You're going to work all over the city, and it's different everywhere you go. And you're going to get popped into units that you're like, I'm not going to work. I'm not hazmat. I haven't ever studied first. Oh, dang. They just sent me on engine 206 temporarily. I better figure out what my initial actions are going to be on these hazmat calls, because I'm going to roll up. Yeah, I got some text to refer to. So make sure you know your buildings, you know your areas, because you're going to get popped all around the city, whether you like it or not, unless you're the most senior guy around and you bid the first day you get promoted. So we also know lath and plaster presents a challenge. If anybody's ever tried to overhaul those places, especially if you bring the wrong tool, it's almost impossible. But people that don't know the techniques, they're way inefficient at it. It's hot out, they get tired, and it's hard to catch fire spread. So if you find these houses that you're like, hey, I know this neighborhood, when we went on these med calls, this is that plaster, I knocked on the wall, I can hear it. All these houses might have lath and plaster. You may start talking to your guys about, like, if we get an attic fire in here or a fire from an outlet in the wall because it's got the old wiring, let's just bring in a piercing nozzle. Well, first let's watch a video about how to overhaul this stuff. After we do that, we know we still may beat us up a little bit. If we run into chicken wire, it's really going to beat us up. Has anybody ever done that? Yeah, tear you apart and you're way slow. You're like, hey man, as a backup plan, anytime we go in this neighborhood, just drop the piercing nozzle at the door. It may not be our first thing, but we may get in there and go, we got a second, dude, go hook that up, let's get it in the wall. So know your buildings. Conventional lightweight trusses, we know 60s, even up to the 70s, started to convert over those lightweight trusses. We talked about their hazards. We know those gusset plates, they have all just those long little fingernails that aren't that long. So as that wood alligators and burns, we know you can scratch it with your fingers and peel off the flakes. Well, those little hooks, they pull right out of the wood, and then clearly those lightweight trusses can collapse pretty quickly and dramatically. So I study a lot of just the UL and NIST and all the stuff they do, the recreations. And any of you guys can too. So as you get out there and you want to know more about it, remember the internet has so much information, and they'll straight explain all this stuff to you, show you timelines, show you all that stuff. So it's easy to learn about. You just have to have the will to want to do it. So I put up like a non-traditional compartmentalized option or consideration. So you look at the large houses. We know, particularly in Gilbert or even in Mesa, we've had some fires in attic spaces. Not mine, of course, but one of the other ones that we've chased those fires through these different compartmentalized attics, and crews have trouble finding where in the attic it's at as they change rooms, and it's a whole different compartmentalized attic, high ceilings. So that's an example of houses that can be difficult to chase a fire that's somewhere in an attic space in a large house. So that may be something where the incident commander or you recommend, hey, maybe we need to go from the top. I know you said you saw some smoke coming out of a vent there. Maybe we come from the top with a piercing nozzle or whatever. But give me some other examples of compartments or open spaces that are conducive to fire spread in the city. And it's on almost every corner here.
Common attic.
Yeah, on like what?
Well, there's like Warren House.
Yeah.
There's a couple buildings and they're connected by a walkway that has a common attic that runs
Yeah.
from one to the other.
There you go. Yeah, so apartments, strip malls on every corner. So strip malls, some of them obviously have some firewalls in them. Some of them don't have it all. Some of them have the mansards or the overhang on the front. You guys all know what that is, right? So remember that mansard typically doesn't have a firewall in it, and a lot of times it's one big common strip all the way through the whole building. So Cody and I went on that strip mall fire at like 76 in Maine or whatever, probably 12 years ago or something like that. And it started on one L-shaped corner, and it burned, basically burned inside, burned into the attic, and then got in the mansard, and it burned all the way to the corner, collapsed the corner, and kept burning. And I was in West Sector at the time. I wasn't the company officer, but we just were having trouble making access to that mansard, getting underneath, because it was made with like this tongue and groove or T111 wood under it. So you'd go and try to hit it with a pike pole even, and you just pierce a little hole. You couldn't get into it. So then we're like, we got to find an A-frame ladder or something. Do we take a chainsaw over our head and cut a hole in there so we can spray water into this thing? Of course, we know mansards, we can also come from the top with a ladder company from the back side of it, you know, and cut a hole and spray water in there, or throw a piercing nozzle in there and fire it off and build our own sprinkler system into it, basically. But at the time, the ladder crew had just been on the roof and then got into a sketchy situation where they called them off. So now we're in that zone where ladder crew's not up there right now. Fire keeps spreading. Put a master stream on the ground through the front window into the drop ceiling. Okay, we got that covered. We can't get in this dang mansard, and the fire keeps spreading. So the mansard's got a pitch tile, little overhang. Ladder crew goes up there. They try to peel the tiles off, cut a hole in there, spray water in there. It's hard to access it. Depends on its construction. So those are those things where we talk about moving down a suite, developing the right attack plan, and then getting it in place. So just something to start considering. We started talking about those piercing nozzles. We know some of the old tactics of, you know, cut a trench, cut a strip, get a hose line, spray some water, stop it. But some of those concealed spaces that we can't get access to, we know that dagger of a nozzle will go through there. We got to consider, well, don't put anybody under there because we're going to put several thousand pounds of water and ruin everything under it. But we know sprinklers are effective, and this sprinkler is a beast of a sprinkler, so maybe we use that. So think about how that's going to affect your tactics and your firefighting. And again, those are two examples that are everywhere. Those strip malls and apartments, you're going to go on no matter what area you go to. So who was on the attic fire in that apartment with the built-over roof? Weren't you on it, Sean? Were you guys cutting the roof or no? So they had that one. We talked about it fourth quarter too as well. So there's that strip of apartment complex. There's a flat roof attic. And then there's also a pitched build-over, lightweight over the old flat roof. So you have a flat roof, attic space underneath, and then interior. And then above it, they built that pitched lightweight roof over it for looks, remodel, all that. Well, the fire started in the lightweight roof underneath it. And again, we talked about going underneath, trying to get through that plywood with a tool. Anybody who's really tried to chop plywood with an axe knows that getting through plywood's a son of a gun, especially if it's 3/4 inch. So that would be one. Maybe you come from the top, but that's another good example of something that didn't have a firewall, and it just kept running that lightweight attic all the way down until eventually somebody made access and got it. So when we're talking about our building, those are the kind of things you bring up. Hey, this is a strip mall. Strip malls, when I look at their buildings, typically they have a long common attic. They have fire spread in the mansard, so I need to approach different tactics. The evaluators go, cool, you didn't just say building, but you told me what you're talking about with the building and how that's going to affect your decisions. So 2-story, strip mall, unique structure. Next one's fire. That one's the easiest one to remember. You can almost always use that one. So really, if you say the fire, you're not really saying anything groundbreaking. But clearly, if you talk about the fire, we're talking about the size, the extent, the location of the fire, where you think that fire is going, so we know fire travels up and then laterally. We can look at reading smoke, stuff like that. We'll review that shortly. So that's another fire ground factor, makes perfect sense. And then volume, velocity, density, color. So we're going to watch some quick videos on reading smoke. They're very short, and they're just a refresher to you guys, because I know you've seen it all before, years ago, or maybe even yesterday. But these are quick enough to just get you a little bit back into the thought process.
Reading smoke is understanding volume, or the amount of smoke present. This can help paint a picture of what's transpiring on the inside. It's important to understand that volume is relative to the size of the bombs, or the structure itself. For instance, it doesn't take a large fire to fill a small building up with smoke. Conversely, don't let your guard down when you encounter light smoke showing from a large structure, as it can take a significant event.
It's like the big house, right? There's hardly any smoke showing out of that huge house.
Smoke can either be volume pushed it's extending to, but it can also help you predict the likelihood of a hostile fire event.
A high risk.
A little bit.
There's got to be somebody alive in there, though.
Velocity, or the speed of the smoke exiting from a structure, can tell you quite a few things of what's happening with the incident. To evaluate velocity correctly, it's important to compare the smoke venting from life-size openings, such as similar-sized windows, doors, and seams in the building that can be found near the floors and soffit and eave line to the roof. Volume push smoke can vent from a structure with a fair amount of velocity, especially through restricted openings, but will quickly slow, while heat push smoke will appear more agitated, maintaining speed and velocity, and will typically have a higher smoke column. The smoke venting from the gable end of the first level roof is heat pushed, while the smoke venting from the second and third level roofs is volume pushed. Observing the velocity and change in the progression of smoke can help you predict the path of fire extension, as well as the potential for a hostile fire event. Remember, underventilated fires can be extremely dangerous. Typically, the faster the smoke is moving and the taller the smoke column is, the closer you are to the main body of fire. Turbulent smoke is heat pushed and maintains its velocity. It's a classic sign of an impending flashover, so don't be overly aggressive, because smoke temperatures can exceed 800 degrees Fahrenheit or 420 degrees Celsius. As a result, no one can survive in that room or compartment. Density can be considered the most important attribute when it comes to reading smoke. Density pertains to the thickness of the smoke, and the thicker the smoke, the more fuel is present. Density can also give you insight on the likelihood of a hostile fire event occurring, and how dramatic and explosive that event could potentially be. Wearing your full protective equipment, venting high, cooling the environment, and flanking are some of the precautions you can take to prevent serious injury. Color is the final attribute when it comes to reading smoke. Though it can be considered the least important factor of the four, the color of the smoke can provide some important information. For example, if you observe black, thin, fast-moving smoke, it can tell you that fire has or will shortly be venting from that side or location of the structure. This can tell you where you have active fire, so you can formulate an action plan and establish your circle of attack. Brown smoke occurs during mid to late stage heating of unfinished wood, which can be found in the void spaces of floors, walls, and roofs. If you observe brown smoke in these areas, be on guard for the potential of collapse, because the heat of the fire has reached these locations and is starting to weaken the support structure of the building.
So if you're on the side of a house, doing a 360 or whatever you're doing as a sector, and you start to see heavy brown smoke coming out of the gable end, right? That may be something to, you hear some people say that, hey, we got brown smoke coming out of the gable end, because they're trying to say, hey, it's affecting the structure now. Where we know sometimes it's black smoke coming out, and you're like, well, somebody's just breached the ceiling, or attic accesses are open and letting smoke transition from the interior into the attic. But when it's straight up brown, you're like, it's burning the attic space. It's burning those structures.
Here we have a normal room with modern furnishings. As the fire grows and develops, it radiates heat out to the ceiling, walls, and surrounding furnishings. When they can no longer absorb any more heat, they radiate that energy back into the center of the room in what's known as retroreflective radiant heat energy, also known as thermal radiation heat feedback. This further intensifies conditions in the room, causing the surrounding materials to off-gas until the point where they all reach their ignition temperature and flashover occurs. Not only are conditions in the fire room unsurvivable at this point, but fire vents out the doorway, adjacent rooms will quickly become untenable as well.
So just quick review, that picture again I think kind of encompasses all of it, right? Look at this huge volume coming out of a huge building. It looks like it's moving pretty fast because it's pushing all the way down to the floor. And then it's dense. Remember they said dense is the fuel, the rich stuff that flashes. And then its color, it's black. So it's all the carbon, it's all the oils, fuels, or whatever it's burning in there. Maybe it's burning a whole bunch of PVC or plastics or whatever in there. You don't know for sure. Carpets or synthetics, right? So that's one you see and you're like, this one might flash on us real quick. Obviously they're outside because they recognize that as well. So occupancy, we talked about occupancy and how that can help you identify the risks involved in there, some of the challenges you're going to face and stuff like that. So oftentimes we figure out the occupancy by the name on it. And why do they dispatch us now? Have you noticed when they dispatch, they tell us at Arby's or at whatever, they start to tell you occupancy. Sometimes they say the names, hey, you're going here, because they're just getting into your head, fire ground factor type stuff. So sometimes we don't recognize, hey, why are they telling us the occupancy? Oh, at a pool store. So helps us identify the fire load. Occupancy clearly determines when they're open, closed, stuff like that. So certain places, you're like, yeah, dry cleaners normally isn't open at night. Clearly somebody could argue that some people live in the back office, stuff like that. But in general, the life hazard there is probably not very high at night. So depending on your occupancy, it also gives you an idea of whether it may be occupied or not, what your challenges are going to be, what the fuel load is, what your hazards are. So for instance, a carpet warehouse, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you see this if there was a fire in there for a challenge? Huh? Yeah, so the amount of fire, the fuel load that's in there. And then what about just those slick floors? Don't you think sprinklers are running or those are wet? I mean, you think you're going to be able to drag hoses very easy in there? So that's going to be a nightmare, just something basic like that. And then of course, if those rolls catch on fire, how heavy's carpet? What if the carpet just has water pumped into it for 30 minutes while you're trying to find the shutoff? It might overload those racks and collapse those racks, you don't know. So clearly there's a ton of little things you could say, this could be a challenge on this incident. So just to get your mind in that process of some things to consider. So another one, if you look at this building, what do you think of here?
Big building with a lot of smoke.
Yeah. What about occupancy stuff?
Probably a warehouse.
Recycling?
Yeah, so that what does that semi truck say? Can you see that?
Leslie's?
Pool supply.
Yeah, Leslie's Pool Supply. So what are in pool supply places?
Chemical.
Yeah, so chemicals, so like hazmat stuff. What is almost everything in a pool made out of other than the concrete stuff? Everything's plastic, right? Your pool floater, your pool toys, your PVC pipes, your filters are plastic fiberglass, all your pumps, housing are glass. Then they have wires that burn, of course, with the metal. So you look at a big pool store like this, clearly that could potentially be huge pallets of those 50-gallon drums of chlorine tablets or liquid acid, liquid chlorine. So in Three's area, a lot of people miss it. I've asked people, hey, do you know this place is in Three's area? But right up against the railroad tracks off of Broadway, there's those big commercial strip malls where the old Motorola used to be. Well, back there's a huge suite right up to the tracks with like 30-foot high ceilings, and it's a pool warehouse just like this. It's a supply house, and it has hundreds, if not thousands of pounds of dry chemicals, so shock, acid, chlorine tablets, tons of PVC, plastic filters, huge racks, super high up in there, like 20 feet high, huge vats of chlorine. So it's a crazy high risk target hazard that if you didn't know it was there and you show up and you show up to the front, you would look and go, this is a pool place. Pool places are dangerous, right? So we have the placards out front as well. So just example of how occupancies help you identify what you're dealing with, what resources you need. Do I consider calling a hazmat component because I know we're going to spray water on this and it's going to run off everywhere? So do I have some guys that have an idea of how we're going to dam dike that, call the right resources, whatever. So we look at life hazards. That's another common sense one. When we look at life hazards, we're looking at location of occupants, how many would be in there in this type of business, what condition they're in. So what are some occupancies that would have some people that be a challenge? Yeah, the nursing facility. So when we talk about our SOPs and we want to refer to those when we're making decisions, we think of, okay, so one of the things in there is, do I take the fire from the victim or the victims from the fire? So an example of that is You know, maybe your normal residential house, somebody's in the living room, a lot of times you're thinking, well, I'll just go in there and I'll probably drag them out or pull them out real quick. I'm gonna take the victim from the fire. But in an assisted living care home facility and you're trying to develop an incident action plan or where you're gonna put your resources, you're like, well, am I really gonna carry these 40 people out of their bed, one crew at a time per person or 2 people at a time per crew? Or do I need to take the fire from this victim? So then when you're developing your action plans, that's how you have a thought process. You're like, well, this type of occupancy, I can't evacuate all these people. They aren't mobile. We gotta stop that fire. Everybody I assign is straight to fire attack. Maybe not as much as to evacuation. Where somewhere else, you go into a restaurant and you're like, well, we're gonna kind of do a combo, but I'm gonna tell these people that all walked in here to eat dinner, you guys gotta get out quick. So that's just some basic ways of thinking about that stuff. So take the fire from the victim from the fire. Same thing when we're talking about, hey, where did I place my line or where did I place my first crew? When we're talking about rescuing or protecting people, we talk about the most severely threatened, right? You put your line in between them or you put your resources to the most severely threatened group, then the largest number, and then the remainder of the fire ground. So in apartments or whatever, and you're thinking, hey, where do I make my next assignment? You know, well, do I do the occupancy next to us? Or do I say, well, fire spreads up and then laterally, probably the person directly above the fire is most severely threatened. These are wood floors. They could fall right through or get trapped on their egress. So yeah, I made my decision because I think the most severely threatened is directly above. Was the most severely threatened underneath? Because some people make their second assignment, well, I'm going to go underneath and salvage or evacuate. And you're like, well, dude, fire normally doesn't spread down very often. Goes up, you got units above. Just say I'm most severely threatened. So start to remember those key little terms when you're making these basic decisions. And then you couple those with the fire ground factors and you can kind of have a thought process and explain this stuff if you get questioned on a test. Or you're going to be the captain eventually and you're going to have other people being like, hey, so how do I do this tactical? Can you help me with this tactical? And then, well, yeah, here, we'll just do some pictures and we'll just run through some radio traffic. Yeah, that seemed pretty good. That was good. I like how you put that person there and that. And then you're like, okay, well, I think I got an idea how we're supposed to do these. But if you bring something forward and you're like, here, you need to think about all these things. Here's where you're going to place your people. Here's the thought processes. Here's why. Then you're going to enable them to make some decisions and be some educators for the rest of the people as well. So we talked about the elderly as well. So arrangement. We're looking at access, arrangement, distance of exposure. So arrangement applies to the interior of a building, right, and the exterior. So when you're looking about where you put crews into position, you know, sometimes they're saying, well, I always send a crew around the back on strip malls, especially if I see some smoke in the back. And then you're like, well, no. If you look at the fire ground factors here, that strip mall doesn't have access back there because there is a chain link fence and then the setback's only 5 feet and there's power lines running over it. So you're really going to put somebody back there? And you're like, oh, I forgot to look at the arrangement. Yeah, I always said I put people to the back of the strip mall. So look at arrangement on apartments, all kinds of things. It affects where you're going to place people, how you're going to deploy your lines. Combustibility of exposures. So you're starting to look at, hey, what's the most flammable thing? Or what's my problem? So maybe in arrangement, you're looking at strip malls. And typically, we like to make it easy when we're practicing the strip mall fires. And we say, all right, well, if I have a strip mall on fire, do we lose that picture, Cody? I think we lost it in our rewrite, huh? Yeah? Okay, so strip mall, right? Just say something basic, make it really easy. Amazing drawing skills, so we're not going to get elaborate, but you have all your suites, you know, and we're thinking about where we're going to place our lines. So if somebody's like, well, the fire's right here, and you're like, cool, so I'm going to go to the largest part of the building and protect that first. My next person to send is to that location because I'd rather lose this one suite than the whole building. But there's more to it, right? Because if you start looking at the fire ground factors and the occupancy type and stuff like that and the life hazard, all the things we mentioned here. So somebody makes it harder. They're like, put it in the middle. Fire's in the middle. And then they give you the names of the occupancies here and it's like, you know, daycare or whatever. And this one is Papa John's Pizza and something else. You're like, well, I made my decision. I look at life hazard. The daycare's got a lot of kids in there. There's a significant life hazard over here. Papa John's, I'm looking at combustibility of exposures, value of property and all that. Papa John's has some metal racks, some metal pizza ovens. It's got some 18 to 25-year-olds that would probably evacuate, but I got some little kids over here. Or over here I got, whatever, another basic example, but I got a pool store like we already talked about. A pool store here and something else here, a vacant occupancy and something else. And you're like, well, this pool store, that's a high risk. If you look at the combustibility of the material there, the value of the material, all that type of stuff, I made my decision to go this way here. So instead of having this canned, well, I'll just go to the longest end, you start pulling up these things and how you make your decisions, and you're a little more educated. You can justify why you're putting people where you're putting them. So we look at the severity, the urgency of those exposures, the value of the exposures, the most dangerous direction of fire spread, and any barriers or obstructions to that operation. We kind of talked about the example around the back. Resources, we won't get into that too much. We just know here in the valley, typically you want to call them early because we know we have automatic aid, mutual aid, all that type of stuff to assist us. Clearly, there's times when we don't have a lot of resources because whatever's going on. But in general, we get into trouble on resources because we didn't call them early enough, and then we need them and we're like, they're not here yet. Yeah, there's plenty of them out there. I just forgot to call them early enough. So just remember, call them early while you're calling them. Action effect. Clearly, we're looking at the effect our current action or our action plan is having on our incident. Am I reaching my tactical objectives? Am I mitigating the incident? Okay, so we're looking at that. Things that need to be done. We talked about thinking about what your next move is, being able to convey that. Should you be asked that in your tests? Or should you be transferring command to your BC and you give them the whole report we told you, and then at the end you're like, I just wanted to let you know we just found out somebody's in the back. We need to send a crew to the rear of the structure to evacuate the adjoining occupancy or whatever. So we're thinking ahead, what we need to do next. As a test, clearly they're looking at if you have an effective organization. So do you have everybody sectorized appropriately? Do you have accountability of everybody in those sectors? That type of stuff. They want to make sure your plan's effective. And then as I always say, on every call I go to, I'm always thinking, what's the worst thing that can happen? Whether it gets dispatched as difficulty breathing, a fire, or whatever. So if you get in that thought process, when you move up in the captain's seat at least, and a call kicks out and you look at the MCT and you're like, okay, it says difficulty breathing, 5-year-old. How bad could this be? This could be, if I went all the way down, what do I get to on my algorithm? Or it says possible ejection. Okay, if they're ejected and it says there's kids in the car, where's that pediatric? I'm a rover today, I'm at 19. Which hospital am I going to go to? So I always try to start thinking that stuff out on the front end, so when you're faced with it and you show up, you're like, I already made a plan for this when we're on our way here. So think about what the worst thing is going to happen, again, because you're going to be moving around the city. And these little things that are easy now, we're like, oh, we just go to desert every time, or we just go to Scottsdale. All of a sudden you're like, oh, dang, I'm out here and I got a drowning. All right, worst thing that could happen is this. It's rush hour. Am I going to call a helicopter right now in another unit? So start thinking that way so you can show up ready on scene. Special circumstances, some of the biggest things to consider. So time of day or night, how does that affect us if it's night? Yeah, basic visibility. And then, of course, a lot of people are woken up, so they're not quite all there. You're kind of a little bit, spun out in your head sometimes, depending on when you went to sleep. So you're not thinking as clearly. We have limited visibility, especially on structures. So we know that we always kill our utilities, our electricity. So that's a bigger deal at night when they cut the power and now there's no lights. Regardless of how much smoke is in there, it's going to go black inside. So does my flashlight work on my pack? So clearly day, night affects us. The season affects us. We know with temperatures. That's another common sense one. We don't have to deal with snow much here. But I would say probably the biggest one, in my opinion, that affects us out of all of these, and I think we forget it here, it definitely applies, is wind, right? Because in the academies, we study line of duty deaths, like several every academy, and there's so many line of duty deaths of firefighters getting killed by wind. And not just your wildland firefighters, but interior firefighters that end up on the leeward side of the wind, and something happens, that a window breaks, somebody opens a door, ventilates the roof, and it pressurizes the building, and firefighters get burned. and killed. So when you look at wind, if you just think about your basic wind chill factor, I mean, everybody knows it's been cold out and then it's windy. You're like, whoa, it's way colder. Well, the way it's been explained through UL and NIST on these wind-driven fires is it's just like that. You increase the flow path, you have 20-mile-an-hour winds. The same temperature air is coming at you like a wind. Same thing as the wind chill factor. So it melts people's mask, burns them up. So we're going to show you a couple just real quick post-incident reviews of wind-driven fires that have had line-of-duty deaths for firefighters, just to make you think about that stuff. But what we want to do is talk about how we're going to convey that wind. So when I used to drive into work and I'd see the palm trees blowing or wind, I'd go, holy cow, this could be a big day if there's a trailer park fire or whatever. But when you do your 360, if you go around and there's wind coming from the back of the structure and you're going to assign your next unit, you need to think about, if I'm going to assign my next unit to come in the front door and there's wind from the back of the structure, they're coming in the leeward side. I could potentially put them in a bad position for them because I'm the incident commander and told them to come in that way. So start thinking about that wind. We'll cover these right after a break.